over 2 years. So it reminded me actually that the technology piece is probably easier doing it from home than it is trying to get all these different computers set up. So thanks so much for the help. We're going to try to coordinate this. I don't have control, which is really an issue for me, but really pushing control, which is really hard. So thanks so much for coming out. Thank you especially to Darlene, who had attended one of our workshops and asked if I could do a presentation for you guys. So, so my role, can you just, yeah. I don't know if you want me to just...
The microphone.
Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. If you can switch slide. I don't know if you just want to signal once in a while. Okay, there we go. So I am with the Grey Bruce FASD program. So it was started in 2018. And we are hosted by Keystone, which is the Children's Mental Health Agency. I started in the role in September of 2019, and just over a year ago, we received funding for second workers. So there were 2 full-time workers dedicated to FASD through Keystone. Now, we are not in the counseling program, so we do not provide direct service for the children, but we support families if they have a child who either has FASD or is suspected of having FASD. We do not need a confirmed diagnosis. We're just going to go with any kind of assumption. And really our role is to provide education and support to the family so we can go to school meetings with them. We put out a newsletter, we do workshops, and also we do a lot of community education, so we do a lot of work with the schools and with community agencies like yourself. So I did put my contact information in here, and at the end of the presentation, I will forward the slides to somebody, and then Melissa can share them, so you will have my contact information as well. Thanks. Okay, can we, next slide, please? I know this, yeah, I'm going to be a real pain.
Andy.
Thank you. So what we're talking about is fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. So this is a wide range of brain differences that are directly resulting from alcohol exposure prenatally. Yeah. So it does not discriminate. It doesn't matter age, gender, IQ. In fact, what we know is that the majority of our kids with FASD actually have an average IQ score. What happens though is they're unable to retrieve some of that information or access it. What happens is the alcohol crosses the placenta during the pregnancy and affects whatever is developing on the day that mom drank. So what we know is that the brain develops all the way through. So not only is the brain more susceptible to alcohol, but because it is developing the whole length, it doesn't matter when mom drinks, chances are that there could be some effect. But we also know more and more that there are other physical conditions, like arthritis and some GI stuff, that is also directly related to the alcohol exposure. So this is a nice chart, but you may not be able to see it very clearly, but the top line is the brain development. So as you can see, it develops all the way through, and other body parts and organs sort of start and stop. So it really depends on when she's drinking as to what's going to be developed, or what's going to be affected. Now some of you, I'm looking around, some of you may be my age, and remember there was a time when we talked about FASD or FAS at the time, and it was really related to brain facial differences. And so those, what we call sentinel features, are, it looks like the eyes are wider apart, and that's because the space, the width of the eye is actually smaller, so there's more of a space at the bridge of the nose. The little groove underneath your nose tends to be flatter, and the upper lip tends to be quite thin. Those are 3 pretty clear signs. If we can see those 3 signs, they don't even have to confirm alcohol consumption prenatally. Doctor can diagnose FASD based on those features. However, it's less than 10% of the kids have these facial features. So what we're talking about is a much larger group of kids who look, sound, present normal, and they're really hard to differentiate from neurotypical kids. So it's really important to remember that that this condition is often what we call an invisible or under-recognized disability, because the facial not like somebody with Down syndrome that you can really identify. So what are we talking about? So the main brain differences, and I'll go into these a little bit more, but first of all is what we see as dysmaturity. So they're going to present much younger than their peers. There's a slow processing pace often. So I explain this to parents as, you know that little circle on the bottom of the computer, and sometimes that circle is really quick, and sometimes it's not. It's painfully slow, and that's processing. And what happens often, if you're impatient like me, and it's slow going, you keep hitting enter, and it doesn't work, right? Because every time you hit enter, it's got to sort of try to start back at the beginning again, and then eventually just gets clogged up and quits working altogether. Well, that's the same with our kids. So kids who have slow processing, every time we say, Johnny, turn around. Johnny, what did I say? Johnny, it's like we're hitting that enter button. So we have to be careful about that. Poor memory, especially working memory. So they might be able to tell you word for word of a movie that they really like, but they can't remember what you asked them to do. So working memory is the memory you need to hold information long enough to do something with it. So whether it's the instructions you just gave them, or whether it's a math problem. So they might be really good at, adding numbers, but they might struggle in math if they have working memory and they have to remember that Billy's got 4 candies, Tommy's got 4 candies, Susie's got 4 candies, and Darlene's got 3. You need working memory to hold 4, 4, 4, and 3. And inconsistent performance is probably one of the most frustrating conditions for educators and parents. And this means that sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. So you might work really hard, get the spelling words on Monday, you are good to go. Tuesday, they're gone. That gets erased. Wednesday, might come back, it might not. And what happens though is that especially educators assume that if you were able to do it on Monday, you should be able to do it on Tuesday, and if you're not doing it, it's because you're choosing not to. And if you get nothing else from this, I want you to remember that it's often not because you're choosing not to, it's that today, it's just not there. Distractibility and impulse problems make them look like they have ADHD. Abstract thinking problems make them look like they've got some sort of autism, so they're very concrete, very black and white thinkers. They struggle often with executive functioning, so that's the front brain, planning, organizing, time management, not so good. And sensory is huge. So I know that Darlene had asked me to talk about sensory, so I'm going to be very heavily sensory driven a little bit later in the presentation. They come to us with a ton of other diagnoses. And that doesn't mean that these other diagnoses are wrong or that you can't actually have 2, but FASD in and of itself looks like a lot of these others. And what you'll find is that sometimes, like those of you who have seen a kid with ADHD, correctly diagnosed, correctly medicated, it's like magic. And this kid just all of a sudden blossoms. If the attention and impulse problems are not because of a chemical imbalance, but because of brain difference, or brain damage done, then the medication may help a bit, but it's not going to be the same kind of thing. So the kids that you're seeing that, medication's not working, they've got a ton of learning disabilities, they've got all of these diagnoses and on a bunch of meds, but nothing seems to be the right answer. You may want to consider, is it FASD, which is more of a global issue. The other thing that happens, and these are not necessarily directly related to the alcohol, but if over time a kid is in an environment that doesn't get him, home, school, work, whatever, they don't understand his differences, they don't understand the accommodations that he needs, what's going to happen is he's going to get frustrated, he's going to get angry, he's going to get anxious, and this is when we're seeing a lot of the acting out and aggression. So it's really about changing our thinking from trying to stop a behavior, because the traditional way of managing that is going to be very different. It's really about trying to prevent the problems from starting to begin with. Behavior modification does not work very well. It's really more about modeling and cueing and working on changing the environment, because we can't change this person. This person's got brain damage. So we're not going to be able to change the brain, but if we can change the environment for him to be successful, and really changing our thinking from he's a problem. And I hear it all the time. I hear it from school, I hear it from parents, right? He's a problem, he's challenging, he's different. Well, the behavior is, but this kid is not a problem. This kid has a problem, but this kid is not a problem. We were really moving away from thinking, trying to change our thinking from he won't do it to he can't do it. And actually, it was interesting, I did a workshop just recently, and they're really pushing us to the next step, which is instead of thinking that he can't do it, is that he can't do it the way that we're expecting him to do it. He's going to have to do it differently. And so really changing our thinking to what do we need to do to be able to support success. So we're going to see if this, was that the video? If you double click on it, it might work.
No.
Is that going to work? Okay, we'll skip it. The video link will be in the handout, so you can get it. So I just want to sort of give you an example here. That's going to be way too hard for me to read from distance. Okay, so if you have a 9-year-old in foster care, let's say he's been there since he was a toddler. At school, what you're seeing is that he's behind academically. He's being described as defiant, lazy. The report card is saying he's bright and capable, but chooses not to apply himself. Parents are saying that he's disrespectful, he acts like a baby when he doesn't get his way, doesn't do what he's told, he lies, he steals, he's never on time, and he has meltdowns over nothing. Foster parents are getting very frustrated, becoming increasingly short-tempered with him. They don't know what to do because the tools and strategies that they've been using for years with everybody else aren't working with him, and they're just not sure how long they can keep him. What are your initial thoughts? Anybody? Top of your head. So, switch. Go to another slide. Oh, there we go. Thanks. So let's look at from brain differences. If we think about the dysmaturity, right? Acting like a baby, poor memory, doesn't remember to do what he was told, inconsistent performance, right, where the teacher's saying he's bright, capable, but choosing not to apply himself, distractible, impulse control issues, that lying, and we'll get into a little bit more about this as well, difficulty with the executive functioning, obviously he's never going to be on time, or certainly not very often, and the meltdowns over nothing may very well be sensory driven. Does this sound like any kids that you've seen? Thanks. Oh, sorry, yes.
I was curious. It does sound very familiar, but can you talk a little bit about around the line and the stealing? How does that?
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. It's definitely on there. I might have to play the video on my computer and put it through the screen, because there is a video that's really good, and if it doesn't work, then there's a link to it as well. But I will definitely address that because it's huge for sure. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a little bit closer look at some of these brain differences. So first of all is the dysmaturity. So this means that they are actually functioning younger than their age. And as a rule of thumb, we typically say about half. Now we know that that's not, exact all the time, but it's a nice rule of thumb for parents and schools, because you really have to support the child where they're at. So an example would be, if you've got a parent with a 12-year-old wants to start staying home alone or with a sibling, for an average neurotypical 12-year-old, that's not a problem. But maybe for this 12-year-old, that's not such a good idea. And so, what we could say to the parent, or I say to the parent all the time, right, is, okay, well, would you allow your 6-year-old to stay home alone? No way. Okay, well, this kid is is functioning much more like a 6-year-old in a lot of respects. And the same with the school. So if in the school they're sending a kid in grade 6 who's 12 to supervise lunch for the grade 2s who are 7, you now have somebody who's functioning like 6 trying to supervise 7-year-olds, and it's going to go downhill very quickly. So my suggestion to the schools always is like, well, maybe there's something else they can do, right? Whether it's stocking books in the library or whether it's a reading buddy for a 4-year-old, like let's give them something, give some responsibility and help them feel good, but in a way that's going to support success versus setting them up for failure. I love this slide, and you probably can't see it very well from where you're sitting, but this is an example of what an 18-year-old with FASD would look like. So the top line is expressive language. So, you know, what I want to say is that you've got an 18-year-old who looks 18, probably reading close to 18-year-old level. Top line is expressive language. So they probably talk like they're 18 or beyond. They might use big words, sound great. Now that is a cloak of competency, because the next line is receptive language or comprehension. So it's at a 6-year-old level. So just because they can talk the talk and look and sound 18 or not 20 does not mean that that's where they're functioning. So we have to be really, really careful about what are they really getting, not just how do they sound and look. And as you can see, like money, concepts, emotional maturity, social skills, all those are the low numbers. So we all have discrepancies, you know, in our skills and abilities, but for kids with FASD, it's pretty pronounced. And if we base ourselves only on how they look and sound, we're going to set them up for failure quite often. So again, it's just really about parenting and supervising them at their functioning age, not their birth age, and you know, just remembering that one of the biggest frustrations for parents is having expectations that these kids just can't meet. The second thing is the slow processing. Like I said, it just takes time. So what happens, so when you see this kid, is he looks like he's not listening, he looks like he's defiant, he looks like he's slow, and maybe what's happening is it's just taking him longer to sort of hear what you're saying, figure out what you mean, process what I need to do next, and even how to begin. For memory, we talked about, you can remember it one day, not the next, especially around the working memory as well. And the other thing that's impaired is sequencing. So what comes first, what comes next, what comes over, what comes under, those kinds of sequencing skills are often really challenged for these kids as well. And in addition to that, we know they have problems with time management and the whole concept of time. So dates, times, appointments get really mucky too. And you can imagine, and as you know, I think one of the questions you had, Allison, was around lying. Sometimes the lying is not lying, but what we call confabulation. And confabulation is not an intentful misdirection. It's when you're telling a story and you have missing pieces because you don't remember. You're smart enough to know that you're supposed to have those pieces and you don't want to look stupid. So what do? You fill it in. And so that confabulation is really filling in the blanks. The other thing that happens is because they're having difficulty with sequencing and time and event, he might tell you this great story about what he did last week. And as humans, our first reaction may be, he's lying. I know full well he did not do that last week. When it may be that he's trying to tell you he did it before now. But he used the word last week, but that's not really what he meant because he doesn't understand time. And so, you know, I kind of explain time for these kids as they've got 3 points in time. Right now, before now, and not yet. And anything before now might be called last week, 2 years ago, yesterday. And so think about that. When they're telling you stories, don't assume he's intentionally lying. Maybe he's trying to tell you is it happened before this moment and in the future. And again, no concept of time, so next week, next year, tomorrow may be really hard, which would also explain why you're hearing these, is it tomorrow? Is it tomorrow? Is it tomorrow? right? Because the concept of time is really, really difficult for them. So confabulation, so confabulation is, like I said, remembering events or conversations that never happened. So, we can also call it storytelling. So when a person doesn't know the answer to a question, they can respond by offering an answer, but it's not with an intent to deceive. That's the difference, right? When you're lying, the intent is to deceive the person. With confabulation, it's just because of the damage done to the brain, you sometimes have to create answers to fill in some of those blanks. Sometimes these events never happened at all. Sometimes they happened, but at a different time. Sometimes it's something that they saw in a TV show or they heard their dad talking about. So again, it's not intentful. And there is a really good handout here on one of the FASD websites that does talk about lying. Can we try the next video? Oh, it's coming out. Well, if you click it, will there be a red button in the middle? Nope. If you double click on it, going way back. A light double click on it sometimes works.
No.
Oh, probably because we didn't enable the content. I enabled the content on mine, but it maybe not when you opened it. Let me try. Because this is Nate Sheets. He is an FASD guru. Can you hear that?
Hi everyone, my name is Nate Sheets, and in this video we're going to talk about perception. I'd like to illustrate perception using the image that went around the internet a couple of years ago and is often referred to as the dress. What's going on in this image is that depending on view mask, some people see a very dark blue and black dress, and other people see a white and gold dress. And the question is, how can different people interpret the same image in different colors? So what's going on with the dress is a visual perception issue, which I'll explain in a few minutes. But how does it relate to perception? We're talking about kids with FASD and other developmental disabilities. We're talking about perception. In this case, we're talking about how they're interpreting the world around them. This can include social interactions, the course of events, and other factors that when they relate that to us may seem a little bit off. So what's happening with the perception issue is the person that we're working with, brain, is not interpreting a situation correctly. When they come and tell us about it, it can be really easy for us to interpret that as lying. So a lot of people with FASD are frequently accused of lying, but what's going on is they are relaying what their brain perceives to be the truth about an event. What's going on with the dress is that your brain is making.
So I'm not going to make you try to strain to listen to the whole thing. The video link is on there, but it does talk about the perception. So if you can imagine, then you've got perception issues happening, plus you have confabulation and memory issues, which is going to lead to some mistruths.
An assumption about what kind
Trying to go to the next slide.
of light is shining from it
Come on.
or not light is hitting it because we don't have enough information.
Now I can't even switch slides. Are you able to? Oh, there you go. You got the next slide for me over there. Perfect. Okay. So again, as I said, often misdiagnosed as ADHD. You can certainly have both, but these kids really struggle with the ability to stay on task and to get back on task if they've gotten off task. I just want to talk a minute about impulsivity. It's really important to understand that impulsivity is not intentional misbehavior. We all have random crazy thoughts that pop into our heads, and most of us take 6 or 8 seconds to think about, is this a good idea? Am I going to get in trouble? Could somebody get hurt? Right? Is this something I should do or not? Kids with impulsivity issues, whether it's ADHD or FASD, don't have that time to think about it, and they're acting on it without giving it much thought. So it's important to remember that when we're talking about impulsivity, it's not pre-planned misbehavior. It's acting on those random thoughts that pop in your head. And I have to say that almost all of the kids that I'm working with that have gotten themselves into trouble with the law, it's because of impulsivity. It's not intentional. They saw it, they wanted it, they took it. And you know, that's what's in an environment that's not supervised, right? So if they've got the supervision and the redirection, it doesn't happen. And we also have to remember that all of us have a harder time focusing and paying attention when we're tired, hungry, or overstimulated. Abstract thinking. So they are going to be much more likely to misinterpret information around them if it's not clear and concrete. And an example would be if, you know, two kids are fighting. Let's say two kids are fighting in the classroom, and the teacher says, you know, smarten up. What the teacher wants is for the kids to stop hitting each other, but she says smarten up. This kid goes home and tells you, my teacher called me stupid. That's not at all what she said. But if you take it very literally, smarten up means get smarter, which means you must think I'm stupid. So it's about language, and English language is very abstract. Or, you know, if you're trying to get this kid to hurry up, and you're saying, come on, pull up your socks, let's go. And they look at you and they say, but I'm wearing sandals, I don't have any socks on. It's very easy to interpret that as, you know, being a smart aleck, you know, he's trying to goat me. It may be very literally, I'm not wearing socks. So just be careful of some of the language and assumptions that we're making about the behavior as a result. So again, when we're talking to these kids, vague terms like tidy, pick up, clean, you know, get ready. He might think he's ready because he's got his hat on. He doesn't have his lunch, he doesn't have his backpack, he doesn't have his shoes. So be really, really specific about what you need. And again, if abstract concepts are affected, remember, not just language, money, time, the ability to predict outcome, decision making, all again very abstract. So executive functioning, that's that front brain. And again, it usually doesn't develop till the kids are, you know, closer to 10 or 12 anyway, but for these kids it's going to be even more affected. And those are things like we talked about, that working memory, but also looking at big pictures. So to be able to understand somebody else's perspective is going to be really difficult. And we do that all the time as parents, right? Well, think about what so-and-so must be feeling. You may as well talk to the wall, because this kid is really, really struggling to be able to put himself in somebody else's shoes. Planning, organizing, really hard. Again, not focusing on tasks, managing time, understanding the concept of time, transitioning from one task to another. Even if it's a task they like doing, it's hard for them to switch gears from one to the other, and regulating emotions is really tough. Okay, sensory processing. This is always very interesting. So these are what we call our little super feelers, right? So they're taking in more information from the environment than some kids. They're processing that information more thoroughly. They have a keen empathy. They often are considered emotional. They get overwhelmed easy. And these are the kids that are having temper tantrums and meltdowns. So what you can't see on the picture is, you know, the socks are bothering him, the tags are bothering him, the seat is hard, right? All of these sensory things. What happens is that we take in information from our environment through our senses, right? What we hear, see, smell, taste. And it all gets brought to our brain, and our brain processes it and tells us what it means. But for some people, those messages are not very clear, and that causes a lot of discomfort. And what happens is one of two things. Either these kids are sensory sensitive, so they feel everything big, right? The lights are really bright, the noises are really loud, the smells are strong, that seat's hard, so everything they feel big, including emotions. And so what happens is their volcano, or beaker, whatever you want to call it, is filling up much faster than the average person. And when you give them the cookie, that they didn't want because the brother got the cookie that they really wanted that looked a little bit bigger. When their volcano is almost full already, what are you seeing happen? Right? So they're much better able to, and this is true for all of us, we're all much better able to tolerate disappointment and change when our volcano is not completely full. But these kids are filling much faster. And in addition, you've got the sensory seekers. So those are the kids who don't feel stuff as intensely as other people feel it. So they've got high pain tolerance. They need extra sensory input, so they're touching and they're moving. So these kids are needing extra sensory input, and you can have both. So that's really where it gets very confusing, because you can be sensory sensitive in some areas and sensory sensitive, seeking in others. And when any of us struggle, what happens is that then we go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? So you've got your kids that are running, you get your kids that are fighting, and you've got your kids that are just shutting down altogether. So it's really about getting the right amount of sensory in order to be able to learn and function. If you see a ton of behavior, think sensory. That's the first thing it may not be, but often the behavior problems that we're seeing are sensory based. Okay, so can I have a volunteer? Have somebody, just one person volunteer? Okay, so I'm going to, I'm trying to remember what I was going to do here. Okay.
Uh-oh.
No, it's a memory thing, it's great, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just get you to sit and pay attention to what I'm saying. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so anybody that's got a winter birthday, when I give you this sign, I want you to count down from 100. Those of you who have spring birthdays, I want you to hum. Those who have summer birthdays, I want you to wiggle. So move, you can stand up, you can dance, but I want you to move. And those of you who have fall birthdays, I want you to tap. So tap your foot, tap your finger, tap whatever you want. So, and what's your name, sorry?
Michelle.
Michelle. Okay, so when, on the count of 3, I want you guys to do what you need to do. 1, 2, 3. Okay, Michelle, I'm not sure where you're from. Today, and how many foster kids do you have? Okay, thank you. Stop. Did you hear any? Did you have an answer for me?
I thought there was foster in there, but that's about it.
Right. Yeah. So if, you're right, I said how many foster kids do you have? That's really, but it's hard, right? When you've got, so most of us can focus on the person that we're supposed to be listening to. Kids with sensory issues have all of this other sensory information coming into them at the same level, right? So it's not like the voice is loud and everything else is background. There's no background for them. Everything is at the same level. I had somebody explain it once too. If you know of anybody who wears a hearing aid, right? Hearing aids are great if you're having a conversation with a person. But in a room full of people, when you have a hearing aid on, especially the older ones, amplified everything, right? So it didn't really help because everything was loud to them. So it's similar for kids who have sensory issues. All of that information is coming, and it's really hard for you, even though I was looking at you, right, directly, to know what I'm saying. And so that's what these kids are experiencing in the classroom. Yeah, so I have a little, I'll grab this for you afterwards. I got a little squishy brain for you. Okay, so I will go into a little bit more detail. I do apologize, I might not be able to see all of the words, but visual, if you're struggling with visual issues and you're visually sensitive, you're often going to be really distracted by movement, by lights, by things around you. These are the kids that are rubbing their eyes, wearing hoodies, wearing sunglasses, putting ball caps on, trying to cut back some of that visual stimulus that they're getting. They might prefer the dark, they might want the lights turned down. Clutter might be really hard for them to manage. And there may be some things that they avoid. They might also have really poor eye contact. And if they've got poor eye contact, all of a sudden we assume that they've got autism. But it may be more sensory driven, right? They might not be very comfortable doing that direct eye contact. Now, if they're sensory seekers, so they need that extra sensory input, these are the kids that are going to probably watch the TV really close, and they might be looking for extra sensory stimulation, whether it's lights, whatever. It was interesting. I had a workmate a few years ago who had done a school observation on a child who was struggling. And the behaviors were worse in the developmental classroom, which didn't make sense to any of us, because a child who was integrated regular classroom and developmental classroom with significant learning problems, we assumed would do better, right, in the specialized environment. And what happened when she did the observation is that she saw that in the regular classroom, it was an old school teacher. So the desks were lined up, there was not much on the walls, the room was quiet, the lights were down, there was not a lot of clutter and stuff around. And she went into the developmental room, and kids were all working at their own pace, the lights were on, they've got really cool posters, lots of colors, it's very entertaining and stimulating, but for this kid, it was too much. So always consider the environment. So sound, again, these are the kids that are going to get really upset if they hear loud noises. They might react if you've got the blender on, or the dryer, the vacuum cleaner. These are the kids that really struggle in a loud environment. Buses, kids who are struggling with auditory. Can you imagine sitting on the bus? You got the hum of the bus, you got the noise going on, you got the echoing of all of the other kids. These are also kids who tend to misbehave in an assembly, because what happens if you misbehave in an assembly? Get taken out, right? Which is what he wanted to start with. So, he might need headphones. Again, they're wearing headphones, hoodies, anything to kind of cut some of that extra noise. And if they're the seekers, they may either want things a little bit louder, or they may be humming and making their own noise. Making your own noise is really interesting, because you may find a child making extra noise because they need that extra stimulation, but they might also be making that extra noise to cut out the background stuff, because they're not able to cut it out themselves, and so by making their own noise, it allows them to sort of drown out that background stuff that's going on. Again, these are kids obviously that will struggle with more verbal instruction and stuff as well. Tactile or touch, right? So these are the kids agitated, and we all know them, right? There have to be certain socks, it has to be certain pants. I don't like those scratchy pants, I want the soft pants. Tags are being cut out as soon as you buy the clothes. They may overreact to touch as well. So, you might have gently touched them on the shoulder and asked them to leave the room, but they're saying that you're hitting them or you're pushing them. So they're very reactive and sensitive to any kind of touch. They may seek out their personal space because too many people in their environment or in their little bubble is too much. They may need to get away from that. These are also kids that really struggle with self-care. So things like brushing their teeth, brushing their hair, washing their face, taking a shower. We often describe them as defiant or assume it's a behavioral thing. But if you think about sensory and think about how many different ways sensory is being inputted during that time, right? The brushing the hair, the water. Some kids don't like the sensation of water hitting their skin. Temperature may be too hot or too cold. So just consider that as well. And these are the ones that may not like messy fingers, and they might be really fussy about stuff they eat too, because again, it's really about the texture, not necessarily about the taste. If they're seekers, they're the ones that are seeking extra input. So they might like rough material, or they might really enjoy a piece of silk that they keep in their pocket and they rub. So they're trying to seek that out somewhere. They're also the kids that are touchy-feely, so they're in other people's spaces, because again, it's hard for them to read it, but they're seeking that out. And they may use more pressure than they think. So, you know, it's the opposite, right? You don't think they're pushing you, but they're pushing others and we're not realizing that they're doing that. Yeah, next. Oh, smell, sorry. So smell. So again, these are the kids who are very sensitive to smell. So they might, you know, what is that smell? And you're thinking, I don't even smell anything. Unfortunately, sometimes they verbalize what they're smelling out in public without really thinking about it. And, you know, they're going to notice things that you may not notice. The ones that are seeking it are the opposite. They're the ones that are going for strong smells. They may really like, you know, really pungent odors or perfumes as well. And they may also be sort of smelling everything before they put it in their mouth. That might be part of what they do. Next. Okay. So these kids may be avoiding certain textures with their food. So, you know, food related, but it's either it's too mushy or it's too hard or it's too crunchy. So they're going to be they can be very sensitive around that. They might also have a preference in terms of drink. It's too cold, it's too hot. They might like one or the other. Certain spices and flavors really bother them. So what happens is sometimes these kids are really hesitant to try new foods. They don't like necessarily eating in public because they don't know how they're going to react. And it can often be misinterpreted as well as difficult eating or disordered eating. So not to say that you can't have disordered eating as well, but it isn't always the issue. And for those who are seekers, they're going to be chewing, right? So these are the ones you've all seen them, right? Their collars are chewed, the sleeves are chewed, their fingernails are gone, they're chewing on pencils, so they have that extra need for the sensory input, and so they're chewing. They may also be seeking out crunchy foods or foods that, you know, maybe aren't as common spicy foods, hot temperatures. They might be oblivious to something that's really hot or really cold, like the rest of us. Okay, so I want you to, if you close your eyes, bend your left arm out and put your right arm out straight. Okay. Are you able to do it even with your eyes closed? Mostly, yeah, okay, good. All right, you can open again. The other thing I want you to do is close your eyes for a minute and really focus on what your body's telling you. So, are you hungry? Can you hear your heart beating? Are you thirsty right now? Do you have any pain anywhere? You can feel your breath coming in and feel your breath going out. Think about the chair that you're sitting on. You can feel the chair that you're sitting on. Okay, you can open your eyes again. That's the awareness of your body. And for some kids, they really struggle with that. Like when you think about your breath, you can feel it, right? You can think about your heart, you can kind of feel it. These kids may really struggle with that. So the other senses that I think are worth mentioning are the vestibular sense. So that's the sense of movement and balance, and it gives you information about where your body is in space. So you were able to bend your arm and put one arm out straight, even with your eyes closed, because you've got that vestibular sense to be able to tell you where things are. Proprioception is a body awareness, you know, where our body is in relationship to others, how close you are to other people, how much force you need to use. I mean, you can break an egg and not, well, most of us sometimes can break an egg and put it in a bowl without shattering it everywhere, right? And yet, you know, and then you hold a pencil a certain way. You try to close doors gently without slamming them. Those are all proprioception, right? How much force do we need in certain environments? And then there's the interoception. So that's the ability to read your body. So how hungry you are, whether you're tired, whether you have to go to the bathroom. Now, for the sake of the workshop, I'm going to just call them all body awareness, but these kids really struggle with that as well. And so if you think about a child who is over responsive, or more sensitive to their body awareness. They're going to dislike playgrounds, car rides. These kids are often car sick. They don't like that sensation of movement because it feels bigger. They may be cautious as sedentary. They might have more difficulty with transitions. They might have to go to the bathroom a lot because again, everything feels big, so they don't feel like they have to go a little bit. They have to go a lot, and then they go more frequently, but for smaller amounts. They might be sensitive to temperature, weather. They over-recognize hunger cues. So you've gotten up from the table, an hour later, could we all eat? Yeah, I know I could. but you also know, no, I can't be really hungry because I've just eaten and I'm going to eat in another hour or 2 hours or whatever it is. For these kids, when they're hungry, like they feel everything big. And they tend to not be very athletic. They, clumsy because they're not very good necessarily at orientating themselves. On the other hand, you've got the kids that are over responsive to everything that's going on in their body. So they might not even notice a lot of commotion around them. They are thrill seekers. They want those roller coaster rides. They like the swing. They like to spin. They struggle to read their body cues. So these are the kids who don't have to go to the bathroom, don't have to go to the bathroom, don't have to go to the bathroom, and then I gotta go 2 minutes ago. They're not feeling it until it's really urgent. They're not hungry because they're not reading those body cues. So these are kids that need to be reminded that it's time to eat. And they might like that heavy hug, they might like that hug. They might hug too hard. They might squeeze pencils too hard. They might slam doors a little bit harder than other people do. And they might appear to focus better if they're moving because they need that stimulation. So let them move, let them wiggle because they might be able to learn better that way. So have you seen any of these kids? Does this look familiar at all for some of you? The good news is that the kids who struggle with sensory issues can also be calmed and settled with sensory. So we say make a game of it, test it out at home. We did this with a couple of times with some of our kids groups a few years ago. And we would have stations set up around the room where the kids and the parents would together go and test out a table full of different smells. Like, what do you like? How does it make you feel? And what we would find is that, of course, a lot of kids like the smell of chocolate because it made them hungry, whatever, right? And they're really pungent. Like, I had a really strong hand cream that most of us would kind of go, no, that's too strong. And some of these kids were just whiffing it up and trying to lather it on because they needed that extra sensory input. They were really going for that. And then you can have textures, so different kind of sand or rice or squishy balls. Just play with it and see what they like, because if you can find something that helps them calm down and feel good, use it to your advantage. And so it's, you just kind of make a game of it. The other thing that was really interesting for me was that I had a magic bag that I'd heated up, and I put it on kids' shoulders, and most of the kids, right, you could just kind of see them closing their eyes and relaxing, and loved it. One kid could not get it off fast enough. Get it off, get it off, get it off. And he said to me, I like cold. Okay, so I went and got him an ice pack directly out of the freezer, a hard ice pack, and he rubbed it all over his body, and you could see him physically calm himself down. So not what I would use to calm down, but it worked for him. So it's really going to be important to be able to test out what works for each child and use it to your advantage. So if you're looking at visual tools, things like transitional bracelet, transitional objects, I'm assuming you guys have probably done some work around transitional objects before, especially in fostering. So a transitional object is anything that a child can take into a new environment to help him stay connected to the environment he's in. So, it might be something as simple as you guys are making little bracelets for each other, and then you each have one on, so when he goes to school or she goes to school, that they can remember you and you can remember them, and they're feeling connected. It may be a picture of a favorite dog or a favorite place that they want to take with them. And sometimes I'll say, just take, if you got nothing else, take a little marker and put a happy face or a little heart on the inside of the wrist, and they can do it for you as well. So it just is a way of staying connected. For some kids, you want to turn the lights down. Again, if they're oversensitive, start the day off well. Turn the lights down. Get the stimulation down. They may need sunglasses, ball caps, whatever, on sunny days to cut some of that brightness. And when you can, limit distractions. Like I said, in the classroom is a really good example. But especially at bedtime, right? So, auditory. For some kids, they like that favorite music in the morning and it helps them go. Others, quiet, I don't want any noise in the morning. So again, it's going to depend on that child. For some kids, starting the day with a bit of a 5-minute morning meditation or relaxation breathing exercise may work. You think, I don't have time for 5 or 10 minutes in the morning. Well, if you can prevent a 20-minute fight, then a 5-minute relaxation is probably not a bad use of your time. For some kids who really struggle with that transition, you can record your voice and the teachers can have it and just play it for them. Not, I miss you, I don't know what I'm going to do without you today, because that's just going to increase the kid's anxiety, but I know you can do this, dude, and I'm so proud of you, and if you have any problems, you can talk to Mrs. Smith. She really cares for you. And so, encouraging messages. You allow them to use head-canceling headphones, noise-canceling headphones if you need it. Try it at home. Again, the summer always is a good time to practice stuff. So if you want to try the headphones or earbuds or sunglasses, whatever works, and then if it does work, just share it with the school. This is working for me at home. It may be something worth trying. And for some kids, they need to listen to music while they're doing other tasks. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but again, for some kids, if they can have music going in the background while they're doing their math, it cuts out some of that background noise and they can do the math better. So, whatever. Tactile or touch. So, again, we spent 2 years telling kids to wear masks, and then we told them they don't have to wear masks. So, but again, for the mask, for some of these kids, imagine for the kids who are really sensory sensitive, that's hard. You've got not only on your face, it might be tight behind their ears, they're smelling their own breath. Like there's a lot of issues around the mask. For texture, some kids like soft, some kids like rough. So if you can find something that works for them, get a piece of that fabric and sew it to the inside of their pocket, or give it to them inside their pocket so they can play with. And if he really doesn't like jeans and you want him to get used to wearing jeans, do it on Saturday. Don't send him to school in something that he's not going to like, because you're setting him up for failure right at the get-go. So just make sure that you're not starting the day with a fight. Put on a pair of pants that he's going to like. And for some kids, that body, that tightness helps. So we've got lots of kids that love yoga mats. Roll them up in a yoga mat like a burrito, or give him a little bit of a massage on his hands or his back before he goes, if that's something that he likes. Again, the smell, when we do the taste test, the scent test, and if there's something that he really likes, spray it on a piece of fabric and put it in a baggie that he can take with him. The thing about the scent is that you can use it 2 ways. If he needs it as an extra input and is feeling a little bit rough, he can smell it to calm him down. But also he can use it if there's another smell in the room that he really doesn't like, then he can use it to kind of overshadow that. And again, don't send him to school with foods that trigger him, like that the smells trigger him. If you want him to learn to eat it, do it on the weekends. Let's not set him up for a meltdown in the classroom. Taste, these are, again, the ones that are chewing. So jewelry is always a good option if you're able to get something that allows him to chew so that it's not on the end of a dirty pencil or his clothes. So jewelry can work. For some kids, using straws, because it takes more muscle to drink from, so you can blow bubbles or use a straw, chew gum, whatever works, really to increase that sensory input. And the body awareness. Again, it's going to really depend on your child, but some like rolling, squishing, rocking. If you find something that works, it may be worth, again, it depends on whether you can transition out of that, but it may be worth spending 5 minutes doing that in the morning before you set them on the bus, because you're bringing that volcano down. We have a ton of kids in Grey Bruce, by the way, who are moving wood. Not for any other reason except to move the wood, because they need that sensory input. And for kids who don't get it in a socially appropriate manner, they're going to seek it. And they're going to seek it by bumping into their peers, pushing chairs, banging into lockers. So if you can get that need met some other way, whether it's the teacher's getting them to carry heavy papers or books to the principal's office, or they're stacking books in the library, or at home you can make them walk around with extra books in a backpack around the house, shoveling, digging, cutting lawn, whatever works. It's get that heavy work out, because if you don't, they're going to seek it somewhere else, if that's an issue for them. And again, for some kids, if they're really sensitive and they're on the bus for an hour and they sit on the back of the bus, like they may be feeling physically ill by the time they actually get to school. Again, if they're not very good at being able to tell their body sensations, bowel, bladder, hunger, snacks, they're going to need that into more of a routine. So just again, consider whether that's something that's going on with your kids. All right, so before we jump into any strategies, because I do have a ton of strategies, I want to just throw it out. If you guys got questions about any of the stuff that we've talked about so far?
So you said they can be a bit of both. Is that common? Like, because you find that both our kids have like a bit of both.
Yeah, that's very common. So you might be sensitive. The lights might be really bothering you, at school, and then at home you're watching TV up close, or smells really bother you but noises don't. It's very common to have.
Can they be like, I know we talked to, but like on certain days it's this way, other days
Yeah. So consider what else is going on too, right? Because if they're already overloaded, or frustrated, or reactive, or whatever else going on emotionally, then those things are going to be even bigger on those days, right? The other thing that I always say to parents is, if you've got girls, anytime they're 8 and up, start looking on the calendar, because you may find that there's patterns to some days being more reactive than others. And we don't want to think about our 8-year-olds as going into those kind of changes, but let me tell you, there's a lot of 8-year-olds going into those changes. So, that's always something to consider as well, but for sure, some days are going to be better than others. And then consider, like, did they not sleep very well the night before? Who else is here? Is it on a Friday? Because by Friday, sometimes these kids are done, right? So it's really not taking much more to set them over the edge. So, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
In your experience, there was a slide about pain, and I know it's sort of like obviously on the spectrum of sensory, but can you provide examples of that, or what people have seen?
For pain?
Yeah.
So it could be either. So you could be oversensitive to pain, right? If you're being touched, but you can be undersensitive to pain. Is that what you mean? The undersensitive. So for instance, I've done presentations with the police, and the example I use with them is that somebody could actually be injured, and maybe you've tackled him, and then is everything okay? And you're going, yeah, it's fine. But he's maybe got a fracture or dislocation. Like, you may not feel pain. I've got lots of families too that tell me that these kids fall down, bump themselves, hit their heads, scratch their knees, right? And they're just up and running off again, right? So sometimes, if those are your kids, when they do complain about pain, you know it's serious. And I can't remember the exact situation, but I know I've had a kid recently where there was an injury at the school. The parent kind of dismissed it, kid dismissed it because they could still use it. But a couple of days later, it hadn't got better, and kid really wasn't complaining, but went in and found out, that I don't know, it was a wrist or thumb or something had been dislocated. So for some kids, their ability to read those body cues is really out of whack. Did that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
But in addition to that, while we're talking about pain, is that there's lots of studies going on right now too that's saying that individuals with FASD, there's some good studies happening, health studies looking at adults with FASD, and there's a different pain perception there as well. So for some of them, not only is there different pain perception, higher or lower, but there's also sort of chronic pain, a lot of arthritis. So if you've got young kids that are complaining about chronic pain, chronic knee, chronic, things that you would think, it's more like a 60-year-old complaint, I would still investigate, because what they're finding is that things like arthritis is showing up much younger in kids with FASD. Yeah.
Do any of those kids seek out pain? Like you were saying about how they might not be as sensitive to pain. Like do any of them, are they looking for things that can burn them or hurt, harm them?
I don't see it that way, as in a self-harm. I think that they may be more likely to do, not intentionally necessarily, but they may have to do more pressure or cut deeper in order to be able to feel it, if they're wondering. But also they're impulsive. So if there's the impulsivity piece and there's no fear, and they also don't experience pain the same way, there is definitely an increased risk, but I haven't read anything about it being intentionally pain-seeking like you would find with somebody who wants to self-injure. Does that answer? There was a hand over here earlier too. Yes.
I just wanted to provide an example of a young lady that had something as simple as a blister on her foot, but she didn't recognize that it was lethal until the mom identified that it was actually effective, that she had suffered from this blister for days.
And not noticing it. Yeah, so that would be another. Thank you.
You said that the brain develops all through before birth, and so basically does that mean for a mother to take in alcohol, it could be one time and that have effects for the rest of the child's life?
Yeah, so, and it was too far, I couldn't remember all of the words on there, but thank you. So, yes, it could be one time. We don't typically see that. It's more in families in mothers who are drinking more regularly. But definitely what we know is that the amount of drinking, the timing of drinking, the pattern of drinking, and the body's own ability to metabolize, and what else is going on, right? So if things are really stressful, you're not metabolizing really well, and it was a one-time party binge, it may be that there is effect on that day. For others, it's more of this chronic, she has 2 drinks a day every day, or for most days. So yeah, the pattern of drinking and the amount definitely play a part in addition to the timing, but also her ability to just metabolize it and work through. Somebody, yeah?
I have a comment about the facial features to present in FSD. So if mother consumes the alcohol between days of pregnancy, 17 to 19, that's when it will present. As I learned in my course.
Right, yeah, it's a very narrow window.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's 2 days basically, that's what
think there's I read sort of weeks 6 to 9 or something like that. I do apologize. It is in the slides too, but yes, it's a very, very narrow window, which is why, you know, if she'd been partying heavily before and after, but didn't drink during that very narrow window, you wouldn't have any of the facial features regardless of how much she drank pre and post that time. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions, comments before we jump into? Okay. Okay, so it's going to be important to remember that the traditional behavior management strategies that you've been using, like timeouts, you know, groundings, stickers, charts, all that, don't work very well for these kids, because in order for them to work, your brain has to be able to learn from its mistakes, it has to be able to remember, it has to be able to generalize, and it has to be able to predict what could happen. And if your brain's not doing those things, like a brain with FASD, then regardless of how beautiful this is, it's not going to work very well. Now, having said that, I think I don't want to throw out consequences. A lot of the books you read will say, you know, it's not about not consequences, it's all about accommodations. Yes, I think accommodations are the #1 thing in order to prevent the behaviors from happening, but I also believe that we need consequences for a couple of reasons. One of them is the adult in the situation needs to have something to do in the moment, because you need to feel like, I'm dealing with this. The kid needs something to do in the moment, and the other kids especially need to see that Billy can't get away with it just because he's got FASD. It's the same consequence for him as it is for everybody else in the house. What's important for you to remember is that the consequences in and of themselves are not likely going to change the likelihood of them doing it again the next time. Okay, if that makes sense. So it's really about prevention. Okay. #1 is routines. So kids who are disorganized in their brain, don't know what, need to have some stability, and so the more consistent the routines are, the better it's going to be. And really what you want to do is you want to create habits. And I'm going to guess that the times of the day that you have the least amount of problems with the kids are the times that never change, right? So for some kids, I've got parents who, struggle all day long, and I'm going, oh, like, how's bedtime? And they're saying to me, oh, bedtime's no problem. He's always gone to bed at 7:30. He gets to read for half an hour. The light goes out. He's asleep by 8:15. Oh, okay. So that's what you want to do, is you want to create those routines that are consistent, so they just become matter of fact, and the kid doesn't have to think about it. If you've got a tough time of the day, I'm always suggesting to parents, create a routine. Create it with them, right? Like, okay, what do you need to do before you go to school in the morning? Well, I need to brush my teeth, I need to get dressed, okay. Don't add any extras, because I don't know what mornings are like in your house. I have flashbacks when I think about mornings at my house when my kids were little. So you don't want to add anything, but if you can be consistent in the expectations and make it visual. So create posters so that you're not having to nag at them constantly. You can just go back to the poster and say, well done, dude, okay, what's next, right? And create those habits. And it used to be that I would say to parents, oh, make a little poster, write it out, cut pictures out. Now I say, take your phone, right? Take your phone and take a picture of Billy having his favorite breakfast, wearing his favorite pajamas, brushing his teeth, and then print them in the order that you want. Kids are self-centered, go with it. Use that to your advantage. Let them look at themselves and how cute they are, and use that as reminders to what the next steps are. Other parent strategies. #1 is going to be lower your expectations to their developmental level. And I'm not saying it's always going to be behind their peers, but if you have a 12-year-old and you're expecting them to function like a neurotypical 12-year-old, you are going to be constantly frustrated. They are going to be in trouble all the time, and they're going to be mad at themselves, and they're going to be frustrated. So you're better off lowering the expectations and build it as they get good at it and they get proficient and they get comfortable and confident, you can increase their the expectations. But if you start too high, we're setting everybody up for success, for failure. Again, back to the consistency. Stay as unemotional as you can. So we know that these kids, all kids, look to adults. That's how they learn. That's how they learn how to react with emotions, but they look to adults. And so the more reactive we are, the more reactive they are. And remember, these kids are developmentally behind their peers. So that learning process is going to last a lot longer than it is for other kids. So they're going to be constantly sort of checking. And if you're heightened, we know they're going to be heightened. And I mean, our psychiatrists have been saying this for years. I've been preaching this for years. But I have to say that a couple of years ago, I had a family in my office when I was doing counseling. And the kid, who was probably 13 at the time, was really escalating. Like, he was rocking, he was starting to cry, he was like almost hyperventilating, he was getting himself wound up. And Mom, who was sitting right next to him, looked like she was hurting for him. She wasn't upset with him, she wasn't angry, she looked like she was in pain for this kid. And so when he turned around, I kind of said to her, because we had many conversations about being emotionally calm, I kind of said, watch your face. And I don't know how she did it, but she turned it off. Like, it was like magic. She just went totally flat. And this kid who was rocking turned back and he looked at Mom, and you could see him physically calm. So he went from a 9 to a 6 or 5 instantly by looking at Mom. So never underestimate the power you have in bringing this situation up and down, and building on their strengths. These kids are always in trouble, right? And we're always pointing out, you're late all the time, you're disorganized, you're impulsive, like all of these things. So really find what they do well and build on that. What's next?
Sorry, I wanted
Oh, that's okay, thank you.
I wanted to do an update.
Have them learn differently. So we know we have to be patient with them. Try to eliminate distractions when you can. Model and do it more. We know that these kids are not going to learn as well from being talked at. So they're going to do much better if they see us do it, they're doing it with us, they're practicing. So that role modeling and reteaching. We had Miles Himmelrich, who's an adult with FASD, who's a speaker, come a few years ago, and he said that the biggest lesson for him was the ability to reteach and relearn and reteach and relearn. So, you know, it's going to take a lot longer for them to get there, but with the right supports. Use visual tools too, like I said, you know, it's hard for them to remember everything you're saying to them verbally. Use visual pictures and supervise them to reinforce what you need them to do. So if you're telling them to get off the computer at 7 o'clock, these kids are forgetful, have no concept of time, have difficulty with transitions. So if you're not there at 7 to transition them off, or 5 to 7 to remind them and get them, right? It's not all about the kid being in trouble when he doesn't get off at 7, because as the adults, we need to take responsibility for that as well. Communicate clearly, right? So make sure, remember the slow processing, giving them time to do the tasks they need to do. I had an ACE once tell me, that it was a clear example, I can't get it out of my head now. She said, you know, we always, when kids, toddlers or preschoolers would climb up on the counter, what would we do? We would grab them, and we would say, get down from there. So do I know if that kid was able to do that on his own or not? No, because I didn't give him the time to prove himself. So if I say to him, get down from there, I need to give him time to get down from there, then I can tell him what a great job he did. But if I'm moving him as I'm telling him to do it, I've not given him the time to prove himself, and I don't know whether he would have been able to. Give clear, short directions. So it's really about putting the clothes in the hamper, putting the books on the shelf. Because if you say, tidy your room or go clean up your room, you're going to run into failure with just about every kid. Because my idea of clean is not the same as his idea of clean. It's not the same as my husband's idea of clean either, but so remember that we need to be very specific about what you want them to do. And give them, so what I had, one of my kids really struggled with this, and so I would say to him, okay, go get the dirty clothes and put them in the hamper, and then he would come back. Good job. Okay, now pick up all of the cars and put them in this bucket. And finally he said to me, stop, Mom. Every time I come back, you give me more to do. Tell me what I need to do right now. And I thought, oh dear, like this will never work because he will not remember the things. So I used the whiteboard. And I had the 6 things, right? The books on the shelf, make a bed, whatever. And then it was like, okay, do any 3, whatever order you want. You get to erase it when it's done. And then when it's finished, come out, I'll give you a 15-minute break and a snack, and then you can go back again. So he was able to break up the task and do it without me nagging at him. So again, avoid the vague terms, avoid lectures. You are only going to have 3 to 5 words, and so make them count. And if you're explaining to them that they need to go downstairs and clean up the basement because the Legos are all over the floor, and the last time that Grandma came, there was Legos on the floor, and I was talking to her last week, and she still has a sore foot, so I'm not sure what was going on, but you better not forget to do that. So he goes downstairs. What has he done? Found the Lego. He started playing. And if he hears 3 words, what 3 words did he hear? Lego, Grandma. Yeah. It's a crapshoot. It's like, so in my brain, I'm very visual, so in my brain it looks like a bingo jar, right? So all these words are going through and you're going to have 3 pop out, random, which 3 are going to be popping out. So make sure that you're picking the 3 words you want them to hear. If they need more instructions later, that's fine. But if we give them too much, they're going to shut you out anyway. And give him the tools he needs to be successful. So I am not saying go out and get technology for these kids. But what I'm saying is that if they already have technology, whether it's an old phone or an iPad or anything else, use it to its full advantage. Because these kids are going to need external brains for the rest of their lives. So they're going to need that memory chip, right? They're going to need help. So use the cameras, use the calendars, use the reminders. And the younger they are when we start using these things, the more likely they're going to start using them later. Because if we start at 15 saying, oh, there's a calendar on your phone you should use, he's going to kind of roll his eyes at you like, yeah, right. So, even for things like medication, you need to be supervising the medication for years to come, but if he's got something that reminds him to come and get you, right? That's the first step. And then as he gets older, he's got the reminder that comes and you're supervising him take it. So that when he's 17, 18, he's gotten into those habits. And provide them the tool they do. So, remember these kids don't have much sense of time, so they're going to need those tools. And if they're sitting down to do homework, make sure that they've got everything they need to be able to do the homework. Because if you sit down to start working on a project and you need the scissors, then you get up looking for the scissors, what's happened? What's that, sir? He's got, yeah. He may or may not have found the scissors, but he did find the comic book.
Exactly. He'll see something, he picks up the scissors, and he goes off, got something else on us.
Yeah, yeah. So, what I'm saying to parents is get a basket that's got scissors, tape, rulers, everything you might need for schoolwork, and sit it down next to him, because the more you can limit opportunities for distraction, the better you are. And again, that's just gentle reminders, right? Bring it back to task. Chunk the work, like we talked about, the homework, right? So giving them some pieces to do that are manageable instead of too big. Helping them understand who to turn to. And anything that you're reading about FASD really says that the number one key to success for adults with FASD is being able to ask for help. And it's hard for all of us. but they need to be able to know who to turn to. So if they're running into trouble on the schoolyard or they're running into trouble at home, like who is that person they feel comfortable going to? And it's going to be hugely important for the person that's been identified to actually help them. Because if you finally get your kid to go seek a teacher in the schoolyard when they're having problems, and the teacher says, like, come on, you're 12 years old, you should be able to figure this out yourself, go back and sort it out with your peers, that kid will never go back and ask for help again. So, you need to work together with the other people in this kid's life so that you can identify who it is that they can turn to. Be patient, especially around the confabulation, because that's very frustrating. Giving limited choices, being consistent, and supervising at their developmental level, not their age. And, I did ADHD work before I did FASD work, and it's the same thing, right? It's about supervision. So if you see your kid heading towards the shed, because you're supervising every 5 minutes, right? So you're eyeballing him every 5 minutes, and at 5 minutes you're seeing him going towards the shed. You can redirect. Hey, are you getting thirsty? Want a glass of juice? Right? Or bring him back in. You want to take the cover off the trampoline? Like, let's redirect and do something else. Because you know there's nothing in the shed he needs. If you're not supervising till 10 minutes, he's actually already coming out of the shed with the ladder. Now it's going to be harder to redirect him because he's got an idea in his head. He's not technically gotten into huge trouble, although he wasn't supposed to be in there, so it is going to be harder to redirect, right? What happens if you don't supervise until the 15-minute mark? Right. You'll hear him. So supervise closely. And praise all their attempts. It doesn't have to be perfect, it has to be good enough. And so because again, these kids are not hearing a lot of good stuff, so they're going to need to hear, good. When it's good enough, praise them, help them feel good about themselves. And the more we know about a situation, the better you are in order to be able to prevent bad things from happening or to set them up for success, right? So really pay attention to the environment. Are there times of day that are really hard for them? What else is going on? I mean, especially at the end of the day. Sensory, for instance, is usually always worse at the end of the school day after they've been, with other kids and lights and noises and smells, and then they were on that bus. For some, it's, if they haven't, every Tuesday is bad. Well, then you realize that, oh wait, Monday night his brother plays hockey, so he's always up later. Like, look for patterns and look for clues. Next, please. Thanks. So remember that the behaviors you're seeing are actually clues something's not working well. He might not be able to tell you what that is. They probably can't verbalize it very well, but they're letting you know that something's not working. So big takeaway points is, I'm hoping you remember FASD is a brain-based physical disability. This is not behavior. This is developmental brain changes. It's important to remember that it's not that he won't do something, it's that he can't do it. And so how are we going to help him so that he can do it differently? And looking at the challenging behaviors as clues, something's not working well, we have to make some changes. And it's huge to remember that our reactions are based on our thoughts and our beliefs. And if we think this kid is intentionally misbehaving, he is defiant, he is lying, he is stealing, what kind of emotional reaction do those words give you? How do you feel? Sorry?
Frustrated.
So I didn't hear that. Sorry.
Frustrated, possibly.
Yeah, frustrated for sure. For sure. Anything else? What does it elicit?
Well, I can see a scenario, the opposite scenario where they're telling you something that's what's the word, confabulation, because of how they perceived it. And then it goes, then you're down a different path. There could be really big consequences for that confabulation.
Oh, yeah.
That they didn't, they're like, whoa, I didn't say that.
Yeah, and not intentionally anyway, right? Yeah. For sure, but it elicits emotions in us, right? So to really think about, you know, is it confabulate? If we think about lying, if we think of it as lying, we're gonna react in a different way than if we think it's confabulation. Maybe he's trying to tell us something, or you know, if we think it's stealing, we're gonna be, you know, we're gonna react very differently than if we think, right, this kid needs supervision, he's got brain damage through no fault of his own, and he's functioning much younger than he is. So, you know, that changes our thinking, which is going to change the emotional reaction we have, and we're going to approach it differently. The outcome may be the same, right? Like, you might still need a consequence, you might still, you know, whatever. And as an adult, he's going to go to jail. But it's how we approach it is going to be very different if we think he is defiant and intentionally doing things to tick us off, than if we realize that this is his brain, right? This is the way he's wired, and this isn't his fault. And it's important to remember that you have to look after you, right? That if we don't take care of the caregivers, then, you know, we're all in trouble, because we don't know what we're going to do if we don't have you guys. And, you know, again, the old mask, the oxygen, right? You need to make sure you're giving yourself the oxygen before you give it to the kids. So it's hugely important that, that you're looking after yourselves. Good. Any other questions?
I would say, like when you were talking about the symptoms of FASD, dysmaturity, poor memory, distractibility, impulsivity, I feel like any of us could have those things. Well, but like, if I think specifically about myself, if I'm impulsive,
Yeah.
I know like I can be retrained to be less impulsive. Like, I want to take responsibility for my own behavior, and I could actually improve on that. Are you saying that people with FASD would have those, but they cannot improve on that? Whether it's them by themselves or us training them? Like, you're saying that...
No, I'm saying that they're not going to be able to innately do it. Like, you kind of went, whoa, I'm noticing that I'm distracted, I'm impulsive, this is what I need to work on to do it. They're not going to be able to have that self-knowledge to be able to do it. So they're going to need a lot more supervision and redirection. And, you know, if you think about, you know, a 14-year-old, we expect a 14-year-old to be able to be in much more self-control than we would a 7-year-old. So if you are supervising him and teaching him more like a 7-year-old with repetition and consistency, then he can eventually learn. But there are some brain differences. The poor memory is poor memory. Like, you know, if that part of the memory is really damaged, then, you know, it's about doing it differently. So we're not going to be able to expect him to read everything on the board, hold it long enough to get it to paper. Like, we can nag at him, we can practice, we can do whatever. If his brain can't do that, his brain can't do that. So how else can he do? Maybe he can do a line at a time. Maybe he can take a picture. Maybe the teacher can give him, you know, a different copy of it. So it doesn't mean that he doesn't have to do the homework. It means that he somehow has to transcribe the homework differently than somebody else.
Yeah, I guess so. I would say, like, poor memory in myself, I feel like I could get better at it. I just have bad habits. I can't remember 3 phone numbers right now, but I think I could if I worked on it.
If you worked on it.
So, like, you're saying they would have poor memory, but is there a possibility